From Little House on the Prairie by Laura Ingalls Wilder. One day they were helping Ma get dinner. Baby Carrie was playing on the floor in the sunshine, and suddenly the sunshine was gone. "I do believe it is going to storm," Ma said, looking out of the window. Laura looked too, and great black clouds were billowing up in the south across the sun. Pet and Patty were coming running from the field, Pa holding to the heavy plow and bounding in long leaps behind it. "Prairie fire!" he shouted. "Get the tub full of water! Put sacks in it! Hurry!" Ma ran to the well. Laura ran to tug the tub to it. Pa tied Pet to the house. He brought the cow and calf from the picket line and shut them in the stable. He caught Bunny and tied her fast to the north corner of the house. Ma was pulling up buckets of water as fast as she could. Laura ran to get the sacks that Pa had flung out of the stable. Pa was plowing, shouting at Pet and Patty to make them hurry. The sky was black now. The air was as dark as if the sun had set. Pa plowed a long furrow west of the house and south of the house, and back again east of the house. Rabbits came bounding past him as if he wasn't there. Pet and Patty came galloping, the plow and Pa bounding behind them. Pa tied them to the other north corner of the house. The tub was full of water. Laura helped Ma push the sacks under the water to soak them. "I couldn't plow but one furrow. There isn't time," Pa said. "Hurry, Caroline. That fire's coming faster than a horse can run." A big rabbit bounded right over the tub while Pa and Ma were lifting it. Ma told Laura to stay at the house. Pa and Ma ran staggering to the furrow with the tub. Laura stayed close to the house. She could see the red fire coming under the billows of smoke. More rabbits went leaping by. They paid no attention to Jack, and he didn't think about them. He stared at the red undersides of the rolling smoke and shivered and whined while he crowded close to Laura. The wind was rising and wildly screaming. Thousands of birds flew before the fire. Thousands of rabbits were running. Pa was going along the furrow, setting fire to the grass on the other side of it. Ma followed with a wet sack, beating at the flames that tried to cross the furrow. The whole prairie was hopping with rabbits. Snakes rippled across the yard. Prairie hens ran silently, their necks outstretched and their wings spread. Birds screamed in the screaming wind. Pa's little fire was all around the house now, and he helped Ma fight it with the wet sacks. The fire blew wildly, snatching at the dry grass inside the furrow. Pa and Ma thrashed at it with the sacks. When it got across the furrow, they stamped it with their feet. They ran back and forth in the smoke, fighting that fire. The prairie fire was roaring now, roaring louder and louder in the screaming wind. Great flames came roaring, flaring and twisting high. Twists of flame broke loose and came down on the wind to blaze up in the grasses far ahead of the roaring wall of fire. A red light came from the rolling black clouds of smoke overhead. Mary and Laura stood against the house and held hands and trembled. Baby Carrie was in the house. Laura wanted to do something, but inside her head was a roaring and whirling like the fire. Her middle shook and tears poured out of her stinging eyes. Her eyes and her nose and her throat stung with smoke. Jack howled. Bunny and Pet and Patty were jerking at the ropes and squealing horribly. The orange, yellow, terrible flames were coming faster than horses can run, and their quivering light danced over everything. Pa's little fire had made a burned black strip. The little fire went backing slowly away against the wind. It went slowly crawling to meet the racing, furious big fire. And suddenly the big fire swallowed the little one. The wind rose to a high, crackling, rushing shriek. Flames climbed into the crackling air. Fire was all around the house. Then it was over. The fire went roaring past and away. Pa and Ma were beating out little fires here and there in the yard. When they were all out, Ma came to the house to wash her hands and face. She was all streaked with smoke and sweat, and she was trembling. She said there was nothing to worry about. "That backfire saved us," she said, "and all's well that ends well." From By the Shores of Silver Lake. She can't be lost, Pa said. I left her outdoors. I thought she was with you, said Ma. She can't be lost, Pa insisted. She wasn't out of my sight a minute. He shouted, Grace! Grace! Laura ran panting up the hill. She could not see Grace anywhere. Along the edge of the big slough toward Silver Lake she looked, and over the flowery prairie. Quickly, quickly she looked, again and again, seeing nothing but wild flowers and grasses. Grace! Grace! She screamed. Grace! Pa met her on the slope as she ran down, and Ma came up gasping for breath. She must be in sight, Laura, Pa said. You must have missed seeing her. She can't be— Terribly, he exclaimed. The big slough! He turned and ran. Ma ran after him, calling back. Carrie, you stay with Mary. Laura, look for her. Go look. Mary stood in the doorway of the shanty, calling, Grace! Grace! More faintly from Big Slough came Pa's shouts and Ma's, Grace! Where are you, Grace? If Grace was lost in the Big Slough, how could anyone find her? The old dead grass stood higher than Laura's head, over acres and acres for miles and miles. The deep mud sucked at bare feet, and there were water holes. Laura could hear, where she stood, the sound of the coarse slough grass in the wind, a muffling sound that almost smothered even Ma's shrill call, Grace! Laura felt cold and sick. Why don't you look for her? Carrie cried. Don't stand there. Do something. I'm going myself. Ma told you to stay with Mary, said Laura, so you'd better stay. She told you to look, Carrie screamed. Go look! Go look! Grace! Grace! Shut up! Let me think! Laura screeched, and she started running across the sunny prairie. Laura was running straight toward the south. Grass whipped soft against her bare feet. Butterflies fluttered over the flowers. There wasn't a bush nor a weed that Grace could be hidden behind. There was nothing but grass and flowers swaying in the sunshine. If she were little and playing all by herself, Laura thought, she wouldn't go into the dark big slough. She wouldn't go into the mud and the tall grass. Oh, Grace, why didn't I watch you? She thought. Sweet, pretty little helpless sister. Grace! Grace! She screamed. Her breath caught and hurt in her side. She ran on and on. Grace must have gone this way. Maybe she chased a butterfly. She didn't go into Big Slough. She didn't climb the hill. She wasn't there. Oh, baby sister, I couldn't see you anywhere east or south on this hateful prairie. Grace! The horrible sunny prairie was so large. No lost baby could ever be found on it. Ma's calling and Pa's shouts came from Big Slough. They were thin cries, lost in wind, lost on the enormous bigness of the prairie. Laura's breathing hurt her sides under the ribs. Her chest was smothering and her eyes were dizzy. She ran up a low slope. Nothing, not a spot of shadow was anywhere on the level prairie all around her. She ran on, and suddenly the ground dropped before her. She almost fell down a steep bank. There was Grace. There in a great pool of blue sat Grace. The sun shone on her golden hair blowing in the wind. She looked up at Laura with big eyes as blue as violets. Her hands were full of violets. She held them up to Laura and said, Sweet, sweet. Laura sank down and took Grace in her arms. She held Grace carefully and panted for breath. Grace leaned over her arm to reach more violets. They were surrounded by masses of violets blossoming above low spreading leaves. Violets covered the flat bottom of a large round hollow. All around this lake of violets, grassy banks rose almost straight up to the prairie level. There in the round, low place the wind hardly disturbed the fragrance of the violets. The sun was warm there, the sky was overhead, the green walls of grass curved all around, and butterflies fluttered over the crowding violet faces. Laura stood up and lifted Grace to her feet. She took the violets that Grace gave her and clasped her hand. "Come, Grace," she said. "We must go home." She gave one look around the little hollow while she helped Grace climb the bank. Grace walked so slowly that for a little while Laura carried her. Then she let her walk, for Grace was nearly 3 years old and heavy. Then she lifted her again. So, carrying Grace and helping her walk, Laura brought her to the shanty and gave her to Mary. Then she ran toward the big slough, calling as she ran, "Pa! Ma! She's here!" She kept on calling until Pa heard her and shouted to Ma, far in the tall grass. Slowly, together, they fought their way out of Big Slough and slowly came up to the shanty, draggled and muddy and very tired and thankful.